Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the second in our series of videos called Linux Terminal Basics. This time around we're going to be working with files. In the first video we talked about generating and manipulating text and sticking it in files and appending to files and doing all kinds of things with text files. So it's only logical that now we would dig a little deeper into files themselves. In this video we're going to talk about creating files, organizing files. We will talk about removing files. We will talk about finding files and finding things in files. And I'm going to show you all kinds of tools to accomplish those sorts of tasks. As before, we're going to assume that you have a little bit of knowledge about working in the terminal, that you have probably poked around a little bit. You've run some commands. Maybe you've already edited some text files, that sort of thing. And in this video, I am using Ubuntu 18.04 with running Bash as the shell. Everything I show you in this video is going to apply to pretty much any Linux distribution you sit down in front of, though. So don't get freaked out about that if you happen to be on some other distribution. It's pretty easy to figure out this kind of stuff, no matter what machine you're on. So I have created a directory called junk that I have placed a whole bunch of files in. And we have all kinds of files. I got a music file there, I got a video file, I got a picture, I got a text file. Actually, what we want to do is we want to read that text file. And so we'll use less. And then I can use the autofill feature. Just press tab. It'll find the file in the present working directory. Autofill that in. You'll notice that every file on this list has spaces in it. One of the things that you'll hear all the time when you're reading books about Linux is they say, don't create files with spaces. It makes them really hard to work with. Not necessarily true. Programs create files with spaces. If you rip CDs into your system to create music files, you're going to have spaces. Probably the same thing with document files, videos, whatever. And that's perfectly all right. As long as you know how to work with them, it's okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we roll on. First, let's get some kind of real basic stuff out of the way. I want to go through some definitions just so that we know what we're talking about and everybody's on the same page. So the terms that we are going to be dealing with when we're talking about files is, first of all, a directory. That is a special kind of file that contains links to other files. And it's a way of organizing the files on your machine. What is a file? It is a self-contained piece of information available to the operating system and any number of individual programs. Files are owned by the user who creates them in Linux. So anything that you create as a file, which goes into your own personal home directory, is going to belong to you. It's one of the things that makes Linux and Unix a very secure system, is this concept of permissions and ownership. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. You'll hear people say file system. It can refer to the file system hierarchy, the way files are organized and managed, or it can also refer to the type of format that is used to store files on a block device. And I talk about ext4, XFS, Fat32, NTFS. You've heard those terms before. So it's an interchangeable term. Kind of messes people up every now and then. Folder is another name for a directory, especially when working in graphic environments. It's interchangeable with the term directory. And where it came from is way back a long time ago when we were in computer science class, and I'm talking 30 years ago, they described files as being like a sheet of paper. And a directory is like one of those manila folders that you put paper together in and put it in a filing cabinet. So think of a hard drive as a filing cabinet. Directories are like folders. That's why they look like folders in your graphic file manager. And then files are like pieces of paper within there. Of course, within any folder, you can have more folders with more folders in it, and it goes on forever. Another thing that you're going to hear people talk about is links to a file. It refers to a file that points to another file or directory. That's a symbolic link, or it can be a hard link. In Linux, we can have a file basically have two file names that appear in two different places. So you can create a link. You can have one file, one set of data, and in one directory it's called this file, and in another directory it's called that file. and those are called hard links. Another definition for link, when we get down into the file system itself, we talk about how we have in the Linux file systems the concept of an inode. An inode is a special little cluster of data that contains information about a file. And you can have multiple links to an inode. That's how you have hard links. And when you have no links anymore, guess what? You don't have a file anymore. So you can say that you deleted a file, erased a file, or unlinked a file. And that's a term you'll hear a lot. Mount. It refers to any device. It's the way that devices are made to show up on a Linux computer. We don't have ABCs and we don't have little drive icons, none of that garbage. Any device that's plugged into the machine shows up somewhere in the file system as a directory. So you start out with the root directory, which is just a slash, and any other storage device or partition is hooked up there. And we'll talk about that actually in an upcoming video. We're not going to get into that one today. A path points to the file system location by following the directory tree hierarchy. So for instance, in my example here, we have /home, which is where everybody gets a directory for their user account on a Linux system, and that goes to my directory, which is Joe, and then I have documents in there, and then I have a text file called letter to Cindy. So that is the full path to that file. When you hear about that, that is called an absolute path. That's the whole address. If you are working within a directory, you're in a present working directory, let's say that we are in the directory documents, well, I don't have to type all that in to go read or do something to letter to Cindy. I just have to put in letter to Cindy. That's called a relative path. And then we looked at this in the last video, so I'm not going to get too much into it until later on, but we do need to talk a little bit about permissions, and I want to get into a little bit greater detail here, but we're going to do that a little bit later on in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this for now, and let's just start with the basics. So one of the most basic commands there is in the Linux system is touch, and touch does two things. If you give touch a file name, so we'll call it file1, and you just hit enter, then what you're going to do is you're going to create a file. And this is an empty file. There's nothing in it. The system doesn't even know what kind of file it is. It's just a file. And you can give touch more than one file name. So we'll go ahead and give it file2 and then file3. And list that storage, and then we've got 3 completely empty brand new files. In other words, at this point, all we've done is create the inode. We have created the part of the file system that says, hey, this is a file, but there's no data yet for that inode to point to. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, how could this possibly be a useful command? Well, it's used all the time in scripts to create what are known as flag files, and it's a good way to get started if you need to create a whole bunch of files all at once. It has a second function as well. If you have touch a file, it changes the date. So let us list the storage. We're going to do it the long way. And you'll see here that we have times for all these files. And you can see that I copied those in here today, September the 16th, and I just created these files at 11:25. So file 1, file 2, file 3, that's 11:25, right? So what if I take the touch command and then I give it file 1 and I run it? What it is going to do, so we can list that again, is it's going to update the last time that file was changed or accessed. So now you see that that has gone up to 11:26. And you can feed to touch a bunch of files or a whole directory full of files, and it'll just go in and say, okay, change the dates on these files that somebody's looked at them, they've accessed them. And that can be useful for flag files, once again, letting the system know that something occurred in a script or a program. And the other reason is that if you have a backup program that looks at those access times, That's the way most backup programs work, is it looks to see if that time has changed since the last backup. And if it hasn't, it doesn't back up the file. But if for some reason you want to make sure something gets backed up, then that's how you do it. You can use touch to do that. So, very cool indeed. Control L to clear the screen. Type clear if that doesn't work. But be sure to type it properly, or else it won't work. So, we've talked about touching files so we can create files. Well, that's nice. What about directories? Directories, we use the command mkdir, and then it's just like creating files. We give it a name, so we're going to call this one new dir, just like so. And now we have a brand new fresh directory. So you're looking here and you notice that these are color-coded, which is nice because it gives you some indication of what kind of files we're looking at. And that is a function of the terminal itself. And some systems have that turned on and others don't. Somebody sent me a note just the other day and said, how do I turn that on? Well, it depends on what distribution you're on, and it depends on what kind of terminal you're using. It usually involves going in and editing your bash RC file, so look it up for your distribution. It's all over the web. It's actually quite easy to do. But mine is definitely turned on because Ubuntu comes with the color coding by default. But you'll notice here that if you don't have that, how do I know that the files that I'm looking at are files in the directories and whatnot? Well, once again, we will ls, and this time we'll give it the long option again, and you will see that right at the beginning of this string of gobbledygook right here where our permissions are, and we're going to explain all that gobbledygook later on in the video, you'll see that anything that's a directory has a D in it. Regular files have just a dash, and then also if you have links, then you'll see an L there. So we can create files that are links to other files like we talked about earlier, and they'll come up as L's. So that's how you can tell the difference between a file and a directory. Another way to do that is to query the file directly like this. So we can use the file command, and if I put in new dir, like so, and I press enter, then it tells me, hey, that's a directory, you idiot. So what if I do the same command here? Let's do file, and then we'll do file1. Now remember, that's an empty file. It has nothing in it. Well, it says it's empty. There's nothing here. I can't tell you what this is. But file is really cool because file can give you a lot of useful information. Right now it doesn't look that way, but look, check this out. Let's do file and do Linux, our Linux system there. Well, look, it tells us that it's a text file, and it tells us what kind of text it is, which is Unicode text. It means it works within a Unix system. Linux is a Unix work-alike, so very cool, very nice. There you go. You can do this with, let's do this, for instance, with that video file there I have sitting in here, that big long one about Ubuntu GNOME. That's one of the early videos I posted on this channel. I just happened to grab it and throw it in here so we had something to work with. Well, it tells us that it's the name of the video. It tells us that it's an MP4 file, and it tells us all kinds of things about it. And one more, we'll do it with a picture. How's that? We'll do it with the picture. And let's see here, what terminal? You get the idea how this works. Well, it would help if we go ahead and autofill. You'll see how you get the idea though. One more. Let's go ahead and look at the song. So it just tells you what you're looking at. That's one way to do it. You can list the storage. You can have your system to be color coded, and then you'll know. That's one of the other things about working in Linux is that it does not need, nor does it care about file extensions. I put txt on the end of text files so that I can look at them and see what it is. But the terminal itself, the shell, knows what kind of file it's looking at, even if you don't put the extension on it, JPEG or ODT or whatever it is. It doesn't even care. So let's talk about organizing files. So what we can do here is let's list the storage again. What I want to do is take all of those files, file 1, file 2, file 3, and I want to put it in new directory. So how would I do that? Well, I got a couple of choices. I can copy them there or I can move them there. And let's go ahead and do a copy first. So use the cp command, file, and then we'll use the glob for the wildcard, which means anything that starts with file. We're going to disregard everything after that, and we're going to just grab all of that stuff is what we're going to do. And then we are going to copy that into new directory, like so. So we do new, and if I autofill, it automatically puts a little slash at the end there. That slash is kind of important. What we're telling the system now is we're telling copy, hey, stick everything that starts with file into this directory. We're not trying to turn it into a directory. We're trying to put it in the directory. So did it work? Well, let's see. List of storage. Well, there's our files. So we have copies of each one of those files at this point. What if I want to get rid of those files? Well, I use the rm command, and I can use it the same way. I can just say file, put a wildcard on it. It'll get rid of all the files. In this case, I can just use the star or the glob all by itself, because if I do that, then it'll just get rid of everything in the directory. You need to be a little bit afraid of the rm command, and the reason why is because if you do something like this that I'm doing right now, and it deletes those files, and you're working at a terminal, there's no trash can, there's no way back, they're gone. So make double, triple sure that you know exactly what you're doing, especially if you're using wildcards, because you can wipe out big, huge chunks of your file system just with one keystroke. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll get rid of those files and take them out of there. Now I want to move up one level, so it's cd ... Another name for the directory above the directory you're in is ... That's why it's like that. Okay, so now let's move those files. So we do pretty much exactly the same thing. We're going to do mv for move, and then we are going to do file, and then we're going to put it in new directory. And there's another way to use move, and I'll show that to you in just a second. So let's go ahead and do that. Now if we list here, we don't have any of those files in there anymore. And if we ls the new directory itself, that's mean we're going to look at what's in this directory. You see that's where those files have gone. Pretty cool, huh? Now, there's another way to use move and another way to use copy. So let's say that I want to just make a copy of that Linux file system thing, just so I have a backup of it. So I do copy, and then I type in li, and then the autofill takes care of the spaces, and it also puts the backslashes in there to accept the spaces so that the terminal doesn't see them or escape the spaces, either way. Those two terms are interchangeable. It just means you're telling the shell, ignore this, act like this space isn't here. And so if we do that, we're going to copy that into, and we could just say text.txt. We'll just call it that. And so it's just going to be the same stuff that's in there. We've created another file, and it's called text.txt. Let me do that, clear that out. See? So we've copied that in there. Now, if we want to change a file's name, we do not have a rename command. What we have is the move command. And like I just showed you that move can move files to another directory or another place. Well, it can also change their name. So we're going to move text, and we're going to call it text2.txt. Or even better yet, why don't we call this file4? Just why not? What the hell, right? List the storage. Well, see, now we don't have that text anymore. We have file4, and then we can move file4 to the new directory. We can list what's in the new directory, and we've put all the files in there. So those are the really super basics of moving things around. Here's another cool thing that you can do. Let's make another directory, and we'll just call it dir2. Why not, right? If you want to remove directories, you got a couple of options. The first one is to use the remove directory command rmdir. Now, this is a very limited command because the only thing that it can do is remove an empty directory. So if I tell it that I want to remove the new directory that has all the files in it, it's going to come back and say, sorry, it's not empty, can't move it, can't do anything with it. But what I can do is I can remove empty directories. So let's do that. So rmdir, and then I'm going to just give it the star, and you're probably going, wait a minute, it's going to wipe out everything. No, it's not. It's going to go through every file in here, and it's going to look for empty directories, and it's going to get rid of them. So watch. Now, we did get a whole lot of errors, but that's okay. If I list the storage, you see that dir2 is now gone. Now, if you want to remove a directory and everything in the directory, that's easy to do too. So let us do, well, first, let's copy, and then I'm going to tell it to do it recursively. You'll see why I'm doing this in just a second. We're going to copy the new directory into another version of dir2, and this time around we're going to put the files in it, like so. We want to make sure that we don't have a slash there, and go. So now we have dir2. You can list the storage in dir2. There's our files, so we've made copies, right? So now, clear the screen. We want to remove recursively, which means it's going to get rid of the directory and everything in it, dir2, and we'll turn it loose. Didn't take long at all to do that, and it's gone. So you get the idea. Very powerful command. There's all kinds of different flags that you can put on RM. There's the F command, which forces it to remove things that sometimes it won't remove automatically. And that's how that works. Be a little bit afraid of that command because it can rock your world. So now that we know how to copy and move and create files and all that other stuff, let's get into some more interesting things. What about finding files on your system? Well, that can be a bit of a problem, right? By the way, if I just type CD, it's a shortcut to take me home. Wherever I am in the file system, I just type CD, it takes me right back to my home directory. Very good little trick to remember, especially when you're doing a lot of work like this. Okay, we're going to talk about the find command first. Find command is a pain in the butt. I don't use it very often. I don't know many people who do, because it requires that your syntax be just right for it to work, so it gets to be a bit of a pain. As a matter of fact, I have notes over here that I wrote down, so I make sure I type in the right thing. So the first thing that you give find is a place to start. We're going to have it look in the home directory, and then we want it to find files by name. And I want it to look for any file that is in here that happens to have the word fame in it. All right, and I put 2 stars on either side that says if there's stuff in front of that, I don't care. If there's stuff after that, I don't care. I'm just looking for any file that has capital F-A-M-E in it. And it sees that we have a bunch of songs that have the word fame in them somewhere. So that's what this listing is up here. You'll also notice that right here we've got some errors. These are places that, for whatever reason, I don't have permission to look into, and these are actually my own files and stuff, but it's set up that way where that it protects the data that's in there. I mean, I can delete this stuff and move it around. I just can't go in there and read it. It's the way the permissions are set up, and if it comes across things like that, then it'll give you I can't read that. Now, find will search the entire computer if you want it to. And if you do have it search the whole system, you know, get yourself some popcorn. Even if you have a really fast SSD drive, there are hundreds and thousands of files on a Linux system, and if you turn it loose on the entire file system, it just goes crazy and takes forever. So I'm going to Control C to get out of that. I'm going to clear the screen. There are all kinds of lovely little options that you can use with find. You can find files by their size. You can find them by the time they're created. Either if you want to find all the files that you created in the last 2 days, you can put that in there. There's a lot to it. But like I said, it's a little bit hard to work with at the command line. So there's actually an easier one to use. We'll talk about the locate command now. Locate is a lot faster because it doesn't search the file system itself. It searches a database. Once a day, there's a job that runs in the background on your Linux system, and it creates a database for locate to work out of. And so therefore, this is updated daily. If you're using locate to find a file that you just created an hour ago, chances are it won't know it's there. But for a lot of finding of files, it's usually stuff that's on the system, and it's in here somewhere. That's usually the way it works. So we'll use find, and we'll do I, which means it's going to ignore the case. So we're going to use the same thing again. We're going to type in fame, but this time I'm not going to worry about making it a capital F. Well, look, we get the same results without the errors. Pretty cool, huh? And it works very quickly because it's searching that database. And there is a command to force it to do that. And all you got to do is sudo update db. That's the command. It works on pretty much every Linux system. So let's go ahead and do that. And what you're doing now is you're just running that manually. And it didn't take very long because it just goes out and looks for what's changed on the entire system and puts that in the database. So if you are going to use locate and you know you're going to be looking for new stuff and you're not sure it's in there, just remember sudo update db. Takes care of that for you. So that's how you would find files at the command line. One more finding type utility that I wanted to show you. And this works exclusively with text files, but it's really great when you're looking for settings within very large files or finding stuff within a file that you want to pull out and send somewhere else. You'll find this command used a lot in scripts to seek out information on the system and do something with it, used within programs as well. And that is grep. We're going to show you a very simple way to use grep. So we're going to tell it that I want to look for the word Joe with a capital J. It is case sensitive in this case. And then I'm going to tell it that I want it to look into documents. Look in my documents. And make sure that we've caught that in there correct. We do. And we're going to look into text files. So grep Joe in documents and everything in there that is a text file. Let's see what it does. Oh, I see. Why is it mad at me like that? Hold on. What am I doing wrong? Oh, I see what I'm doing wrong. That's a double quote there. That's why it was going, huh? What do you want me to do? I don't understand. You put a single quote in here. I don't know what to do with that. Okay, so now it went in and it found pretty much everything that has my name in it. It has the file name, and then it has a little bit of the text. So let's do the same thing once again. This time, let's look for the word YouTube. So it's pretty much all of the files that I have that are text files that mention YouTube somewhere in there. And then it shows a bunch of text where the word is used. It's very useful if you're trying to figure out what file did I stick that information in anyway. I have no idea, man. That could be anywhere. Use grep. And once again, grep is a lot like find. There are a lot, I mean a lot, of very useful options that you can use with grep to make it even more useful than it already is. So we looked at file earlier. I want to show you one more before we move on to the next thing, and that is, what if you really want to know everything there is to know about a file? This is kind of an extra, gang. This is probably not something that you're going to use every day. But what if you're looking through your system and you find some file and you're like, huh, I need to know more about this file. Well, let me show you a stat, because it's like way too much information. What file should we choose? Let's do terminal. And then we'll do JPEG. Of course, we know this is a picture. And look at all the information that we get from stat. So it tells us that the file name is terminal space icon JPG. How many blocks does the file take up? It's a very small file. What inode number it is right there, that's the inode number. And then down here we've got all of the permissions associated with the file. So access, well, that means if for the person who owns the file, I can read, write, and the groups, they can read it, and then the world can read it. And we got the owner of the file, the UID, that is me. I'm user 1000 on this system, and my username is Joe. And the group ID, what group does this file belong to? Well, it's right there. It tells us that it's a regular file over here. How many links are there to this file? Well, there's one. Now, one of the cool things about links, and I wanted to put this in here, is that people often ask, well, what happens if I am running a program and then I'm running updates in the background and the system replaces the file which I am running right now? Well, what it does is it changes the file name and it creates a new file, but it removes the old file name. Your program has that file open. So let's say that you're running your web browser, Firefox, and then you have your Firefox binary that's open, and then you run updates and you get a new Firefox. You're probably thinking, well, that's going to get screwed up, isn't it? No, it's not, because what happens is that as long as that file is open, there's a link to that original data that's in the file. And as soon as you close Firefox, you get no links. And the system goes, well, there's no file there, so it marks the data pool, the part that held that file, as being usable. And then the next time that you open Firefox, it'll be the new Firefox. That's how that works in a Linux system. That's why you can do online updates for most things, except for instance like the kernel, because well, they do have live patch these days. You actually can do that if you want to get into doing that sort of thing. But most of us, when we update a kernel, we have to reboot the system. But everything else, not a big deal. We don't have to reboot. We can log out, log in, or we can close the program that we're running and open it back up. So that's how those links work for us. So this has been really kind of fun, hasn't it? It's interesting that we can do all this with files. But what if we are in a big hurry? That's when somewhat graphic tools get really useful, especially if you are in a situation where you just want to search and destroy. So there's a program that I use called Midnight Commander, which is a file manager that runs in the terminal. It's not the only one, it just happens to be the one that I use. And I have this installed on all of my machines. So we opened it up from within that junk directory. Well, look, here we go. We can switch back and forth between different panes here. We got two panes open, so I can have another directory over here. And this is everything that's in my home directory right now. We can go and look into the file system. We can go out over here and you see that we've got the ... which is the directory above. So if I want to look at something in temp, for instance, let's go find that. We have access to temp as normal users, and we have, this is all the stuff that's living in temp right now. I can use this to copy files over from here to there. I can use this to delete files. So let's go ahead and delete a file here. So what's really nice about this is that if your terminal supports it, and most do, this is going to be mouse driven. So let's say that I want to delete the file there. Well, look, this time around I get a really, do you want to do this? Well, yes, make it go away. I can also do that with directories. So delete right there. And yes to all. I want to get rid of everything in that directory. Let's say that I want to copy this terminal picture, and I'm going to put it in the temporary directory. That's how you do it. Preserve the attributes. Boom. Did it show up over here? Why, yes it did. It's in here. So that's how this works. It is very cool, and like I said, if your terminal supports it, you can even use your mouse and to navigate, or you can use the keys, and there's just tons of options in here. So this is like a file manager that runs in a terminal. I have this running on all my machines on the network, and it's really cool because it allows me to, I can be logged into another machine through a terminal and open this up, and I can, let's say I'm doing a search and destroy in the file system. I want to empty people's trash cans in their desktops, even if they're on, because I get OCD about stuff like that. Well, I just jump in and I can navigate to where I need to go to do that. Super, super easy. So when I'm done, I can use the mouse, or I can use F10 to exit, and it puts me back at my normal prompt. Using a file manager at a terminal is very much like using a text editor at a terminal. We talked about doing this. So if you, for some reason, need to get into your regular file manager that comes with your system, well, you could just fire it off if you wanted to. So Nautilus, is that right? Did I spell that correct? Okay, yeah, there you go. Nautilus, and we want to go ahead and put that ampersand in there because that's going to tell it to put it in the background. So I have a little file manager running here, and now I can do things graphically, like change permissions. So if for some reason or other I wanted to change permissions on a file, let's say that I wanted to change permissions on this BBC, then I would right-click here, and I would get the properties, and then I would click over on permissions, and then I can graphically change the permissions for that particular directory. More about permissions is coming up at the end of the video. We're going to get into that before we close this down. So when I close that, remember how we did this before, is that we get back to a prompt here. If I type in jobs, then I see that I have one running, and it's Nautilus. When I close Nautilus, when I make that go away, that job goes away in the background. And then if I run jobs once again, you'll see that, well, it says that it's running. I thought I got rid of it. Well, I did get rid of it. So I don't understand. It's okay. There it is, done. It just took it a second to get shut down. So that's how that works. Now, what if I want to do something as root? I want to work in a part of the system where I don't ordinarily have permissions. Let's say that I just added a new hard drive, I just mounted it to the system, and now I need to change the permissions so I can read-write files in it. Well, the only way I'm going to do that is as root. So in this case, just do sudo and then Nautilus. And it would help if I started with an N. And now I open up one of these that is going to be give me root access to the entire system. I can go in here and add, remove, change permissions to files, that sort of thing. Now, do remember that this is kind of dangerous. I mean, this is going to let you remove system files, but it does work. And when I close that, it seemed to have made it mad, or the terminal mad, but that's okay. Just hit enter and it should get back to normal. Or Control-C gets out of everything. Control-C is your savior. If you ever get a program hung up doing weird stuff like that just did, just hit Control-C, and that should return you to a prompt. That is the cancel command, and it shuts down most programs. So let us go back before we end up the video and talk a little bit more in depth about file permissions, because we have pretty much covered all the commands we want to talk about. But I do want to kind of go a little bit deeper into the permissions and make sure that everybody understands them. We just touched on them in the last video, so let's make this one just a little bit more in-depth, shall we? So let us go ahead and read with less that file called Linux. And we'll scroll down here. Now, we saw this before the last time. So, file attributes that define who can access or change a file and whether a file can be executed as a program. And when we do ls and we use the long option, we get this string of gobbledygook right here. So what that means is that the first part tells us what kind of file we're looking at. So a D right there at the beginning means it's a directory, L means link, and then there's also the just the hyphen, which means a regular file. Permissions are placed on the owner, which is the first set of 3 after the little indicator of what kind of file it is, the group, which is the second group of 3, and the last group of 3 is everybody or the world. And so when we reset permissions on a file, we need to do it for those 3 levels. So the owner permissions makes perfect sense. You own it, you can read it, you can write it, you can do whatever you want with it. The group permissions, the way they work is that on a Unix-like system like Linux, you can have this concept called workgroups. Not like workgroups from Windows, that's a different thing. What it is that if you have a whole bunch of people that are assigned to work on a project, then the system administrator can create a new group. Let's say that you're working on Project X, so he may create a group called Project X, and then he may create a directory somewhere on the system that is owned by Project X and the group Project X. And all of the files created within there belong to Project X. And so anybody who has access to Project X and they are the member of the group Project X as a user, because as a user you can be a member of different groups. Matter of fact, I can show you that very quickly by just running the groups command. You will find out if you do this on your machine that you're a member of a lot of groups. See all those groups that I'm a member of? So any file that is owned by any one of those groups, I have access to. Now, in the case of modern Linux and Ubuntu especially, groups are used to define different permission levels on the system. So that's what they do. But a file can belong to a group. Now, everyone makes perfect sense. That's everybody. So we talked about octal values and permissions. We talked about setting permissions this way, right there. And we talked about doing it with letters. Also, when you're dealing with directories, it's a little bit different, all right? So the permissions that you set for a directory can make it so that people can not see in the directory or can't copy files out of the directory, and it's all listed there on the paragraph. A couple more that we didn't get to at the beginning. I just forgot these were down here actually. Root can refer to the base of a file system, the slash, or the user with administrative privileges, such as on a Unix Linux computer. And finally, tree, a way to visualize file system structure. Blah, my mouth's not working. And then we have this little example down here. I am going to place this text in the description for this video, and you may find it useful, so you might want to copy and paste that and stick that in a file of your own. Thanks for the great response to the first video that I posted in this series. I was really a bit surprised. So many people said, hey, we really like this, give us some more. I said, well, I'll go ahead and do number 2, and that way I can start a playlist so we have them both together. Your feedback is always welcome. Check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook if you're a Facebook user. And if you are somebody who likes to chat about Linux, check out our community called Easy Talk. That is accessible through easylinux.com. And if you join there, it's very safe, it's secure, it's a lot of fun. We have moderators that make sure that no monkey business goes on within the forum, and we run the forum ourselves. This isn't something that's sponsored by some big corporation somewhere that they can change the rules or pull it out from under us. Nope, I host it myself. And I have control of it from the server on down. So check it out. Thank you for watching once again, and be looking for part 3 coming up sometime soon.